Welcome back to part two of this exclusive interview with Duke Kern and Sir Tarek. And we also have the very honorable Sir Sarshai with us. We were talking about bridge battles. And you were breaking down how rock, paper, scissors, observing the other force, reading what their tactics are in the moment and being able to counter it with yours. So if it looks like they're going to make a shield, if it looks like they're going to do a cannonball, you bring your shields forward, hunker down. If it looks like they got their shields forward, then you bring your spears forward and they start picking people off.
Right. And the goal is to be playing scissors against paper as much as possible, because paper is the shield wall, and if their spears are back, well, then you're going to pick apart the shield wall. And so you want to, if the fighting takes place on the bridge, a lot of times some people will go, well, we're just going to play the cup response. And the mistake that people make is they get anxious and they go too far to the end of the bridge, where when the cup is formed at the end, so this is the cup and here's the bridge, these guys have an advantage because they can shoot, they can get you from both sides and stab you. And the response to that is not to get anxious and go too far. And at Panhandle, I got sent to, the troops were uneven, so I got sent to the opposing side. And one of the things that I was constantly saying is no further, because Trimaris was playing the cup near the end. And it's a good strategy. We've all seen it before. And what happens is usually somebody just says, I can't take it, and they go. So the idea is let them come back onto the bridge where now you have a level playing field. Don't be suckered. Don't lose, don't lose because you were you couldn't, I came here to fight. Okay, well, yeah, you can fight. You can still fight,
I've seen the cup defeated by a very targeted charge that went on a oblique, trying to hit, like, just everybody would come off the bridge and immediately turn to the right and hit like one side of the cup really hard, because if you can break through, you've really caused a problem for the other side. So it
makes a difference. Yeah, it makes a difference depending on the size. Now, when you've seen that work, what was the size of the bridge?
It was probably Penzic, so it was probably a sizable bridge. And the other piece is that usually when I've seen that work, what's happened is the side that's creating the cup is creating the cup because they've got it tridded down to the point where that's their strategy to try and hold as long as possible. So they're not really deep, in their cup. So when you have a cup that's, 1 or 2 people deep, it's pretty easy to break through. When it's, when you form a cup and you got, 8 ranks deep around it, you're not going to get through.
Happening. Yeah. And I think it is much easier to do that, or a better strategy. And I've seen that happen before. I've seen it happen more on the bigger bridge at Gulf Wars, which is like 18 feet. I think that Penzic, the bridges are even bigger than that, right?
Yeah.
Or some of them.
Yeah.
So.
And that also kind of brings into discussion, like, the overall strategy, like, years of fighting, for the East Kingdom at Penzic. I can tell you that a lot of times, a unit is given the instruction of, your job is just to hold this bridge. That bridge over there is the one we're going to take and stream around their backfield. If you manage to trick them down and stream around, great. But we're putting a smaller force on your bridge. So we really just want you to focus on holding it as long as you possibly can while we overwhelm on another bridge. So you kind of have to understand what your task is when you're a commander as well, and then adjust based on that.
Is that the hammer and anvil kind of?
You can call it that. I'll talk a little more about those concepts a little bit when we talk about the field battle.
Right. And I do think that I want to say something about the strategy that Tarek said, though. To me, I look at strategy as strategy is knowing your opponent's capabilities, knowing what you can do, knowing what the big obstacles are, and seeing the big picture that will cause the victory condition, right? You know what the conditions of victory is, and these are the obstacles we have to overcome. Tactics are, well, how do we account for this one part, or this, if you're of a smaller melee, how do we account for Baldar, who's going to kill everybody? How do we account for Greg? How do we account for Greg, who's going to kill everybody? Who's going to stop him? And then the tactic is, well, we're going to take these two and they're going to do this to that Greg, and the rest of us are going to go over here. And that's the person who's, the tactics are different. And it's funny, usually people who say they're good at, they're better at tactics than they are strategy. And I think they're being modest a lot of times. If you're good with tactics, you're usually good with strategy, but it's not the other way around. I think the people who are the most experienced, and they're the better strategists, because they have to know what their troops or the opposing troops are capable of, and they have to know them personally. You know, when I mentioned Ice Falcon, you know, we were talking about you know, who's the best strategist he had ever seen, and you know, and he was just, my knight is the best strategist I've ever seen. Right? He could get the big picture and say, this is what we're going to do, and actually he could do the tactics and bring it down. I do think Spider was a better tactician than my knight, but Llewellyn was still, I think, was a better strategist. You know, but you know, Andreas said that he was as good a tactician as Lucan, but he said, look, Lucan was the best strategy, you know, general he had ever seen. And I think there's a difference between that, and the strategist is someone who knows gets the overall picture. And I'm just going to talk a little bit, just one more thing about, you know, if anybody's read Sun Tzu, The Art of War, I don't know if the ideas of tactics and strategy come from that, but I think that's what we use and we apply from Sun Tzu's Art of War. You know, something he had said was, everybody can see my tactics. It's right there out in the open. What they don't know is the strategy that's going on behind it, causing us to do those tactics. And that's how you win a field battle. That's different. So anyway.
So it's clear that back to the rock, paper, scissors thing.
Sure.
It's clear that when they got the shield wall up, the paper is up, you hit him with your spears.
Yep.
But what about the cannonball? When is the right time to use the cannonball? To send in a pulse charge to break their line? What is the cue for that?
So you're usually not sending the pulse charge necessarily to break their line. You're usually sending it to disrupt their spears.
Yep.
The only time you're sending it to break the line is if the victory condition of the bridge is holding the middle of the bridge at a certain point during the battle. Then you're charging to try and push them back to maintain control of that point of the bridge before that clock point happens. But if it's to the last man, you're not going to cannonball charge just to put the shield wall back. You're going to cannonball charge for one of two reasons, either to mess up their spears or to counter their charge. So I'm not a big fan of standing to accept a charge. I always think it's better to charge into a charge.
Yeah. So that's a really good point, Tarek. We've spoken about that. And when you see your opposing troops on the bridge, it looks like they're massing behind them with the shields. You have your cannonball can do two things. He can, you know, cannonball the spears, but he's also, or she, whoever the person is, the cannonball is also really useful at disrupting that charge. You hit the person who's charging from the opponent, and you know, a mass of shields coming forward, and right when they charge, you throw a Solon, right, Sir Solon, or Gregory, say, Greg, I need you to stop that charge. I'm sure, you know, he times it. These guys know the timing of, okay, they look like they're standing there, and the guy's looking back and like, hey guys, we're going. And then right when he turns, boom, they're hitting him, and that guy's going over, and the charge just fizzles. And so, you know, one of the other things when it comes to throwing a cannonball is, how do you know when to do it? Tarek alluded to this a little bit earlier. If they have more spears, it's easy. If their spears are better, if you have the same number of spears, but their spears are better, and you're just, you know, filling in the spears over and over again, and you're losing because they have some really, you know, badass spears up front, you got to kill some of them. And the only way to do that is sometimes even if your spears are equal, you send a cannonball because then they're going to respond to it and your spears will pick them apart. So that's another reason you would do it. And that's just knowing and watching and seeing we're getting picked apart. Their spears are better.
Well, you
You have
just
to
said
be
it, what you just said, I think is interesting. It sounds like you're using the cannonball as a diversion or distraction for the
right.
spears. They react to that, and then that gives your spearmen an opportunity to take the open shots.
Right. And it's a good tactic to whittle down their spears anyway. But it's necessary and required if their spears are better or they have more.
And if you're
So,
doing a 1 or 2 person cannonball, you don't necessarily want them to charge straight. You want them to
right.
charge across the spears. Because it
It
ties up,
doesn't, yeah.
it ties
Yeah.
all the other spears, all the other side spears up as they run across the spears. And then your spears step in and kill them before they can recover their weapons to block.
And they don't see it coming. Because when you're spearing, you're so focused on those guys in front of you, and all of a sudden, boom, you're getting hit. And so it really is the best way to do it is from the angle. It's so important.
So I'd like to acknowledge that Sir Soshai is here. Would you like to add anything to the bridge battle conversation?
You're muted.
Yeah, one of the most effective things we had for stopping a shield, which Kern mentioned earlier, I think, is have the shield wall drop to their knees as their charge is coming in, and the glaives and great swords come up, and as they hit our wall and start falling forward because they're being pushed by the guys behind them, it's open season on heads.
Yeah.
Are y'all still using that at all or not?
Oh yeah, and I'm happy you brought that up. I glossed over that and assumed a lot when we were talking about that. But you do have to have when you're fighting on a bridge. I think it's important that the commander knows you got to have spears, you got to have your shields, but you got to have those poles because they can do things that a spear can't. They can get closer. They can baby seals, right? So thanks for saying that, Shosai.
Another thing on your which Tarek mentioned about charging across the shields. Typically, we would start that guy from our left if he's a right-hander because he goes across, and as he's crossing, his shield is protecting his side, and he can see the spears as he's coming up and attack them with a sword to drive them down and across, which, as Tarek said, opens everybody up because your weapon's all tied up, moved to the side. But I just found it was better. If he's going from our right side across the other way, his side is open to the shields all the way across. So it's a little thing to think about at that moment. Whichever hand they are. If it's a left-hander, start them on the right side. But so their shield will be towards the enemy.
That's why I almost always spear left-handed. Because most of the shieldmen are right-handed, so I always spear left-handed for that reason.
Yep, it opens up. But also as they're crossing over,
yeah,
they're covering themselves.
Yeah.
And flipping them over. Also, I tended not to use really good shieldmen to do that. I'd take some young guy who, as Kern was saying, oh, I got to fight. Okay, get over there on the left and charge across to the far right, all the shields, and kill across all the spears and kill the one on the far side when you get there. And then
or take them off the bridge with you. Just take that last guy off the bridge.
There, and they're going to get whacked because the pulse charge guys always get killed. Almost always. There are a few guys that I knew that could leap in and leap back out. But so if you're going to sacrifice something, sacrifice a pawn. Not a duke or something. But,
okay.
Those two things I noticed.
So we haven't talked much about setting up the bridge. Is it a good tactic to have your reserve shieldmen lined up on the left side so that as people die in the shield wall, they can shift right and your reserves can kind of move right into the line smoothly? Is that a good tactic?
If you're grounding, yes. You definitely want to feed from one side. If you're not grounding, it's You just have them ready to go. But having some type of avenue and lanes is important.
Yeah, and
So,
somebody to direct traffic in the back.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to, the commander preferably, but somebody needs to be in the back, making sure there's clear lanes. Because if you don't do that, the clear lanes will go away.
They will, because
It'll
everyone wants
just
to
be-
see what's going on.
It just becomes a cluster. So you need
Yeah.
somebody in the backfield who's making sure the lanes stay clear. If you're gonna do a charge, he's getting everybody lined up and kind of coordinated. Feeding spears in, and you have a lane for that. So somebody has to be directing traffic in the backfield, or it gets ugly.
So what you're describing is the sergeant of that,
Could be the
bridge.
sergeant, could be the commander, just somebody. It doesn't, somebody needs to have that role. It doesn't necessarily have to be a defined rank.
Right. And speaking about knowing your role, when you are the commander, you need to know what your strengths or what your weaknesses are. And I found out early on that when I was commanding with a spear, I was not a good commander, because you see the other people up there spearing. I'm better now, all right? But you see the other people up there spearing, and they're getting your kills. they're having fun, and I love spear. So does Tarek. He's a great spear. But I start inching up, and I'm getting closer, and then you get shot because you can't protect yourself when you have a spear. So I'm better at being cautious with a spear now, and just when the old Roman, the Triarii were the veterans who, when the shit hit the fan, the old veterans would come out, and that was game. That was like that's the way I look at it. That's the way a commander should be. I'm a much better commander when I have a shield, for two reasons. One, I don't get shot with arrows, right? And the other one is, I'm not the biggest dude, and getting up in the front line, I'm going to get blown over. That happened to me at Panhandle continuously. So, so I think it makes you want, if you're a big dude, regardless, if you're used to being up in that front line, you're missing your favorite part, and you have to be responsible and do the right thing, and fulfill the role of being a commander.
I think polearm's not a bad choice for the commander also, because you're probably not going to get up into the spear duel. But if there's a rush, you're really not commanding a lot when there's a big crunch. You can still hit some people from the second or third rank, and then back up and command again when it separates again. So polearm's probably not a bad choice.
But I think it's very valid to reflect on your role as a commander, because there is a desire to be the hero. You want to have
right.
Yeah,
hero
of course.
moment, and that's not the job of a commander.
That's right.
It's to give the opportunity really for other people to have that hero moment.
Yeah. But if you're a knight, you're supposed to be foremost in battle, right? So it's hard. Anybody that's been fighting, and you don't have to be a knight to want to be foremost in battle. Everybody wants to be that. So
All right, let's switch over and talk about the field battle. Sir Tarek, could you, for our viewing audience, can you describe what a field battle is, just as an overview?
Yeah, so a field battle is pretty straightforward. You're in a big open field, and the two armies line up on either side of the field, and they indicate that the battle starts. Like at Penzik, they usually shoot off a cannon, but there's usually some indication that the battle starts, and then the armies march, run, dash at each other, and field battles are typically to the last man. There are certainly resurrection field battles as well. But the classic field battle, when people in the SCA say field battle, is usually to the last man. So that's what a field battle is. And, I kind of would talk about a field battle starting kind of at strategy and then working my way down to tactics. So for a field battle, one thing that's really important is the strategy has to be relatively simple. As Duke Kern said earlier, we're not the Roman army. We're not drilled to the degree of the Roman army. So if the high command draws up battle plans that look like a football play, it's not going to work. I've seen it. It doesn't work. It can't be super complicated. It's got to be fairly simple. Um, so that's where you start with a good strategy. Then from that strategy, typically jobs are given to each of the individual units. So and that's where you have to know your troops, like Kern said. So a bigger, slower moving unit, their job might be you hold the center, right? You advance slowly and hold the center. Whereas some younger, faster moving units are typically, you guys are going to be the Harriers or the flankers or whatever it is. Once you have your job as a commander, then it becomes really important just to understand what your role is. If you're the center and you're, in your strategy meeting, your leaders say your job is to hold the center, you are going to be outnumbered initially in the battle. I need you all to hold until our flankers could come around, take them in the rear and take the pressure off you. Then you know what your job is. Your job is to fight a defensive battle, right? So because of that, you have to get your troops to understand what the role is. Don't go running off, stay tight, fight really defensively, support each other, make them pay for every inch. That's your role, right? So understanding your role as a commander is critical. And I've said this to Kern multiple times. In my opinion, the most important people, absolutely most important people on the battlefield during a field battle are the reserve commanders.
Yeah.
Because typically what you tell your reserve commander is your job is to watch the battle and turn it. Your job is basically to see what's going on the battlefield and say, if we hit that unit over there right now in the flank, we're going to turn the battle and then do it, right? And so typically that reserve unit, like when I was in the East, that was ICOT. It was Duke Gregor, and he had a lot of royal peers, like 3 dukes, almost all knights, like 80% knight unit, and we were typically a reserve unit, and they would just trust Duke Gregor to apply himself where he would wreak the most havoc and help turn the battle, right? So your reserve commanders crucially important. They're overwhelmed and they're not going to hold. And if they fold, they're going to flank your main unit. So the reserve commander knows, hey, I got to go support that flank. If I don't do that, the whole battle plan is going to fall apart.
Sure, Tarek,
Yes.
could you please repeat what you just said?
Which?
Just in the last 30 seconds.
Okay. So I said to your reserve commander, maybe they see on the left flank that the left flank's about to be overwhelmed. And if it falls, then that unit's going to come and hit our main army in the flank, and that's going to turn the battle against us. So as the reserve commander, I see that, and I say, I have to stop that, and I turn the battle in our favor. Those reserve commanders are the most important role in the battle. Then other than that, once you have your assignments, everybody just has to stick to their assignment. And then of course, in most field battles, after the first 60 seconds of the battle, it's a big chaotic mess because people haven't stuck to the plan or some part of it didn't work. And that's where your reserve commanders have to call regroup and gather people to them and look at the battlefield, right? Because I've seen people regroup and gather up 20 people and chase after 2, right? You got to regroup and look at the battlefield and determine over there we're needed and head that way. So that's really important as well, is just gathering up, troops, forming up new battles. I've been in major battles in the SEA, right? So you get an awareness after a while and you can look at the battlefield and go, we're in really good shape over there. we're in trouble over there. We need to go support them.
Mhm.
Or we're in really good shape over there and there's nothing else going on. So let's go be in even better shape over there, right? It
Right.
just depends. You have to read the battlefield. And really that's mostly what it is. In terms of, individual tactics, unit tactics, it's pretty free form when you're in a field battle. You want your unit to try and stick together, especially if they're not a high-end unit. So, there's different types of units. So, for example, some units just work really well together as a shield wall. Martin's household, for example, who you spoke to, they're really good at that. When I was in the East and I mentioned I was, fighting with ICOD with Duke Gregor's household, it was almost all Dukes and Knights. So literally Gregor would go hit them in the flank, and we would actually spread out a little bit, not stay together like a tight unit, because the skill level of each individual fighter in that unit, 80% of them were knight or better, and half of them were royal peers. And there's so much skill level that whatever we went up against, we would just devastate. It didn't
You were
really
killers.
matter.
You were
Yeah.
killers on the battlefield. Yeah.
Yeah. So depending on the relative skill level of your unit, you can have a unit of, not super killers, but people who work really well together, and they can be very effective at what they do. Right. So you have to know what different units are good for and apply them at the jobs that they're best suited to.
Yeah. And depending on the size and the room that you have on a battlefield, like at Gulf Wars, there's only so much we can do. When we turn perpendicular north-south and the line is going east-west and we're lined up that way, we have a little bit more room for maneuverability. Penzic's got a bigger field. So it's,
huge.
yeah. And so, at Gulf Wars, you got to be engaged. The idea is if your troops are not engaged, you're going to lose, because if they're engaging more than you, and you have too many people in the back, you're going to lose. I think, Tarek, you can tell me if I'm wrong. At Penzic, you can do a little bit more, subterfuge. You can screen one group to allow something to happen. Maybe it's not as much, but you can tell me what I mean.
There's
At those
also a
big
big
battles.
difference between a battle that has 500 people on a side and a battle that has 150 on a side.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. The units that are moving around are so big, and you have a little bit more time. Like in a battle that's 150 against 150, where you've got units, maybe, a unit of 30, a unit of 40, a unit of 30, a unit of 30 a unit of 40 hits a unit of 30, that engagement's going to be over quick. Right. So
Right.
you don't have as much time to react. Whereas if you have a unit of 80 hitting a unit of 100, that's going to take a while to churn through. You can't even tell necessarily 30 seconds into that engagement which side's going to win that yet,
Right.
because it turns into a little bit of a attrition battle at that point in the battlefield.
But over on the other side, you got 200 versus,
Yeah.
50, and that's over fast. So then, and you're not losing as much.
Right.
So you may lose the 80 versus 100, but you're gonna get something out of that to the other side. You're gonna win it. So that's what I meant by the subterfuge, is throwing one unit or screening one unit to keep them out. And it's the same idea as when you're doing smaller tactics. How do we count for that dude? How do we count for that unit? And
we have about 8 minutes left.
Okay.
Can we focus on small unit tactics and how to train and prepare for small unit fighting?
So you mean small unit fighting within a larger engagement, or
Yes.
a small melee?
No, in a larger engagement.
So I'm always a fan of look for a bigger unit.
Yeah.
As a small unit. I know at our practice, Martin said something like, if you're one person, look for two. If you're two person, look for three. My thing is like, I look for 10 or 20. I want to go where there's more of people on my side to join up with. I'll grab stragglers and bring them with me, but I don't want to be in a 3-on-3. To me, that's not optimal. I want to be in a 10-on-20 or 10-on-10 or 20-on-20, or better yet, 20-on-5, right? But,
Right.
I want to be with a bigger unit. So I don't do a lot of small unit tactics. I
Well,
grab
I think
people.
what Martin was trying to do is if you're a one, find a second fighter and
Yeah.
then find a third fighter and now go and kill the twos or the ones, because three people against twos and ones, if they know what they're doing, they have a plan, they're going to win. But that, I think that's what you're describing.
I
It's
am
just
to
on a
some
larger
degree,
scale.
but I would
Yeah.
say if you're one, find two. If you're two, find three. If there's 10 somewhere, go join them.
Yeah.
Don't chase one or two around as
Sure.
three, right?
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
more my point, is just,
In smaller tactics, the key to victory is inspiring your troops and knowing your capabilities and having a couple plays. I mean, everybody knows horns of the bull, right flank, left flank, send out the bulldog, the one guy by himself that they, if you got Gregory on your side, Gregory, you're the bulldog. Here's your job. You're going to go flank deep and you're not going to engage. And you're going to go deep around and they have to respect you because you're screwed if you don't. In small group tactic, it's more of one-on-one, and whoever can kill somebody fast goes and helps somebody else.
and it
It's
depends on your mix too. Like if I've got, two shields and a spear and they've got three spears, I'm telling my shields charge them.
yeah.
So, but if it's, two shields and a spear and two shields and a spear, it's the tactics are just fight better than them. Really,
And
honestly,
on the-
there's not a
right.
lot of tactics
Yeah.
there.
So Tarek though is
on small units,
oh, go ahead.
playing off of something Tarek said earlier about a reserve commander. You want to find an opening and hit a flank.
Mhm.
You don't want to just add your weight. So if you've ever got 4 guys and you see me having 50 guys facing 50 guys, don't come and join my group. Run down the back of the other group, as you said with
Good point.
Gregory. Don't engage heavily. Just run down the back, and all their spears and glaives are going to freak out and be facing you. At which point, my 50 guys will be able to destroy their shield wall because they have no spears and glaives supporting them. We used to do that with Blacksword all the time. I had very fragile guys. A lot of them weren't terribly good fighters, but if 5 of us ran down the back of a 30 or 40 man unit and never really engaged them, we didn't lose anybody, but all their guys would turn around. And then if it was Osgard or Duntier or whoever was fighting on their front, would just destroy them because we were pulling their spears and glaives away. It's even if we didn't hit them. Now, if we had good fighters, we'd go in and kill a bunch of their spears. But it's just that really disrupts. And I'd much rather have your 5 guys behind them than beside me, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the things you can do, which I was going to say, which is similar to what you described, is if let's say you regroup and you're over here by yourself, you just finished up killing your opponent, and the other opponents and your team are facing off, but you can't get, trying to run up in front and reform the line. Don't do it. Run up and do a Gregory. You can't throw the sword if you're not engaged, but you can hit them from the side and smash into them and disrupt them, knock them down, right? You can't swing the sword unless they're engaged, but go knock them down.
And understand the rules of where you're fighting. I mean, if you're out in the West Kingdom, you can run up and kill them all from behind.
You got to do the conventions.
You could from
gotcha.
different conventions, right? In Penzik, if you go behind them, you have to make sure that they acknowledge you before you hit them.
Right, but you can push into their line.
Well, you can also foul their weapons.
You can foul their weapon. You can just knock them down. You can totally do that, and that's the thing that
I was going to say,
new fighters don't know.
The spearman, if you reach across him with your sword and drive his spear down to the ground, he doesn't have to acknowledge it because the guys in front of him is going to kill him.
Yeah,
that's right.
So,
Okay, folks, we have about 2 minutes left.
sure.
Sir Tarek, do you have any final thoughts?
Not particularly, just that, in general, when you're thinking about strategy and tactics, keep the strategy simple. And then as a commander, when you're a unit commander, always keep in mind the particular job you've been given to do and try and make your decisions based on that job. Your job might not be the most glorious job in the world. Maybe you're given the job of hold the flag, or maybe you've given the job of giving ground slowly and attriting somebody. Whatever your job is, that's what you have to focus your troops to do.
I agree.
Okay, Sir Kern, any final thoughts?
Just make sure you're having fun. Yeah, really, that's what it comes down to is make sure it's making it, when you're a commander, make sure that you're putting people in places where as much as you can, where they can be successful, because, you know, it's winning isn't everything, but it doesn't suck. If it's just for fun, let me win, you know, and you know, make it fun and have a good time. Make sure your troops are having a good time, win or lose, because it's, you know, we all want the no shit stories there was, you know, so.
Well, thank you both, and thank
Yep.
you all for joining us tonight. And I don't want to thank the frog in my throat. It hasn't been fun. But
Hey, I'll
For
see you.
hosting us.
Everybody
I'll see
else,
everybody. I'll see everybody at Gulf Wars, right?
Thanks,
I
guys.
hope
I'm
so.
gonna try to get there.
All right.
Nice meeting you
Thank
all.
you, Your Grace. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Your
All right.
Excellency.
See everybody.
Love you guys.